I'm Beth Pariseau, Senior News Writer at TechTarget, and this is IT Ops Query Season 2, The State of SecOps. Kyler Middleton is Senior Principal Software Engineer at healthcare tech company Veradigm. She is also founder, owner, and CEO at 14ers Consulting, an IT services and engineering firm, as well as the co-host of her own podcast, Day 2 DevOps, and the founder of an IT training website, letsdodevops.com. Her LinkedIn bio says, "I will teach you, it's unavoidable." Welcome, Kyler.
Thank you so much for having me, Beth. I'm excited to be here. And just having you read all those things, I feel tired.
I'm like, I can't believe you have time to do this. Thank you so much for taking time out of that crazy schedule to hang out with us.
Absolutely.
So, most recently, you and I talked a couple times about the great CrowdStrike incident. And I wonder what you think are the takeaways, if any, about SecOps from that.
I think it's fascinating from a whole bunch of lenses. The most striking, just as a regular human person, is that they took down like a third of the world, a third of the biggest industries in the entire world. It shut down commerce for days and nothing changed.
Right.
Nothing, like at all. I would think that like something, if I caused this, I would get fired. So if a business caused this, they would get fired and they would be terminated. But that's just not how it works. Their technology is so good and they're so ingrained in this enterprise ecosystem that we just moved on. And I get it. People make mistakes. We should show them grace. It's just striking. That's the biggest takeaway I had as just a consumer.
And it also just speaks to the nature of the beast these days, right? Just that how software dependent the world is, how interconnected things are, and how young a discipline software engineering is, comparatively speaking.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, there were some people that their takeaway from CrowdStrike was that there's a disconnect between security ops and network ops. Do you think that's the case in general, whether or not it's a takeaway from CrowdStrike?
I don't think it's a connection here, but I think it is definitely a disconnect. The cloud architectures that I have seen, very few of them are filtering based on layer 7 information for networks. So like the URLs in the HTTP headers. Most of them are just permitting based on ports. That's how networks have always been done. And that's what you sort of have to do depending on your technology stack, because reading through TLS and reading through encryption is really hard. That's how it's designed to be. So generally, the network team makes sure it works, and then the security team deploys client software to do filtering where the encryption stops. You don't have to read through encryption if you have an implant on the client, and that works great, but we need to keep expanding that. And particularly in clouds, you have tools in your toolbox that can filter through that stuff, that can read through encryption, that can do layer 7 filtering. There's third parties, there's native tools. You should be doing it. If you're a network engineer in the cloud, you should be doing it. If you're not, stay on. We'll cover it.
Okay. So why do you think there's that disconnect there? Why do you think many network engineers aren't doing that? And how do you think we bridge that gap?
I think the systems and security operations have always worked closely together because of that historical dependency. If you need to have a client on the endpoint, you have to work with the systems teams because they run the systems. But the network, the databases, the other sort of verticals, those are less well integrated with security and with systems because they don't need to be integrated. So you have to do that work on purpose. And database and network folks don't really want to. Security says no a lot. I just want to run the thing. I want the computers to work. That's my job. Operations, just uptime. But you got to remember CIA. You got to remember all three of those. And if you're just focusing on availability, you're missing the point. You're missing 2/3 of the pie.
And the database and the network are where the keys to the kingdom lie, as far as attackers go, right?
Yeah.
So it's more crucial that those things be well secured.
Absolutely. And as you move to clouds, which many of our enterprises are either there or moving towards there now, you get a lot of that stuff for free. You don't have to maintain your Nexus switch versions. You don't have to be upgrading all your access switches. You just get that. It just works. So you can spend your time doing more interesting stuff. I know that sounds kind of scary if you're a traditional database engineer or a data center engineer. You're thinking like, we don't have top of rack switches. No one's going to need me. Not the case at all. Your focus just goes to more interesting stuff. Securing the entire stack, making sure your BGP is set up so it can do failover with redundant pathing, the interesting challenges, and not just wiring. You don't have to do cabling anymore. Celebrate.
Yeah. So overall, what do you think is the state of security operations right now?
I think it's really good. That's certainly not the Hollywood take. I know we have this idea that's been prevalent for a long time that defenders have to win absolutely every time and attackers have to win once. And that's just not true. We have layered defenses, and with both third-party tools and native cloud tools, those tools are getting incredibly good. And you should layer all your incredibly good into a security sandwich. And those attackers have to beat every single layer before you catch them at any layer. And so that blue teaming job, that defense job is getting easier, getting more empowered. That toolbox is getting bigger. So I have lots of companies and tools and technologies, but in general, that's the trend that I see. This job is getting better and more stable, which is good for all of us, right? We want our computers to work. We want our cars to work. When we're building like computers into our eyeglasses, we want them to stay working. So it's good. It's a good change.
Our eyeglasses and our pacemakers and other things that are
Yep,
kind of important.
absolutely.
So you mentioned the cloud here, I guess, cloud giveth and the cloud taketh away, because that interconnected nature of things leads to stuff like CrowdStrike. But to your point, there's tools that people didn't have before. So if I'm a SecOps person wanting to get good in the cloud, what should I look at first? What would be your advice?
I think it's a really scary question that a lot of people are asking themselves. What happens when we move to the cloud? Am I still needed? It's the same question folks ask when automation starts to happen, and those are married. Cloud and automation are married together because clouds are great platforms for automation. In about 2017, I got the opportunity to move from just a purely network engineering. I had a CCNA wireless, CCNA security for firewalls, route switch. I sat as CCIE. I did all the Cisco certs for these big metal boxes that run everything in data centers. And I wanted to learn cloud because I saw it coming. So I took some contracts that would put me there. And I was really worried that nothing I had learned would be applicable because cloud is magic. Cloud is amazing. It's totally, they reinvented everything, right? No, absolutely not. Everything you have learned is shaken, not stirred into the cloud. It's still TCP/IP. It's still Windows and Linux. It's still routing. All your BGP stuff is still applicable if you're coming from network. If your database is the exact same, you can just pick different sizes and speeds of disks. Absolutely everything is still applicable. So from a security ops perspective, everything you've learned is still useful. You can take a big breath. You can center yourself a little. You're still valid. You're still useful, but you will get more tools. So you will have the opportunity to learn more stuff. You'll be able to log absolutely everything and aggregate those logs together. So you'll be able to have insight into the network layer and the systems layer and the database layer and maybe your egress and ingress and your WAFs, and they can all go to one place. And you're no longer marrying 6 different tools together to try to aggregate all those logs. You can just say, hey, all the things log to this one place into Splunk or something like that, into your Elk stack, and just alert on it. So your skill set will be growing, but it's more horizontal than vertical because you'll be able to see all the other verticals and all their logs and start aggregating stuff together. So it's really an exciting time. I think it's a lot of opportunity. Chaos is opportunity in the right lens.
Right. We hear a lot about the so-called skills gap in security. Do you think that's a misnomer, or is it a matter of confidence?
I have so many feelings about this, and I have a lot of anxieties. I am worried about this. So generally, when people say that the skills gap is companies are trying to hire senior security engineers. They want super smart people that have been doing this for 10 years. And there just aren't a lot of people in the cloud that have been in the cloud for 10 years, much less focused on the security side. So there's room for you to skill up if you're coming into security, but it might be hard to get started. The way that you can do it is just go do it. And I know that sounds silly and kindergarten level logic, but there is no Nexus switch you need to buy. There is no CrowdStrike license you need to go register for. You can just go do it in the cloud for a couple of dollars a month. So like, just go do it. What I am worried about, and I haven't found a good solution to this yet, is AI is starting to come and it's starting to get smarter. And that's a great thing. It's another tool for us to use. But I'm worried about it disrupting the ecosystem, where if AI can be our tier 1, then how do we get tier 2? Because tier 2 comes from tier 1, right? Like you practice and learn and grow and you're tier 2 and 3 and 4 and you move up until you're an architect. But if we don't have a tier 1 anymore, how do we get there? And I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
maybe we skip it. Maybe you just become empowered and you jump right to tier 2 and we redefine what those words mean. But I'm worried about the ecosystem of security operations, and I don't have good answers for this yet.
Yeah, there's definitely some potential help for when you log all the things and you alert on all the things, then that can be overwhelming, and there's potential for AI to mitigate that. But to your point, I've heard this said about developers too. If you're not starting at the beginning as a developer, how do you upskill? How do you get to a point where AI is realistically useful to you? Because you know what you want it to do and you have those basic skills. And I don't know the answer either. That's a big emerging question people are just starting to think about.
Yeah. If you know the answer, you're probably the C-level for an AI company. So please come hire us. Beth and I, we'll totally consider your offers. But yeah, it's interesting. For programming too, everything is the basics swirled together and built. Kubernetes is 6 different basic skill sets in a trench coat. And it can look really scary if you think, oh, that's a huge person. No, it's not. It's 6 different raccoons that you can tackle individually.
That's awesome.
I grew up in the country, so I've got some country analogies here for everyone.
Nice.
But if you don't understand those basics, if you let AI do that part for you, you cannot grow because you won't have the foundational knowledge that lets you understand more complicated stuff. So for SecOps, for programming, for almost every skill set, I think you should start with the basics and potentially turn your AI off until you get it. You need to understand arrays. You need to understand logging. You need to understand kernel implants, CrowdStrike. Please send some of your developers back and learn that a little better. And understand what happens when it goes right and when it goes wrong. And then turn your AI on. Once you've got it, once you grasp it fully, just basic, super basic stuff, how to do really intro stuff, then turn your AI on and start building more complicated stuff and deploying at scale and all those bigger problems.
Right. Okay. So, while you're not the first expert guest of mine to say that the state of SecOps is really pretty good at this juncture, we also hear a lot, those of us in the chattering classes, about how breaches keep getting more impactful, more costly. There was an AT&T breach that affected every customer, and these things like CrowdStrike, they take down a third of the world. So do you think the perception that there's an issue with SecOps right now is just because of that magnitude? Or is there a way that we can become more proactive rather than reactive and kind of improve as an industry?
It's hard because in a just world, we would have like 1 or 2 breaches a year or less, and the market would punish them. You would say, oh, that carrier is insecure. I'll switch to a different one. But what happens when all the carriers get hacked every year? There's no alternative. There's no secure place to go.
Right.
So as a consumer, you kind of just write it off. You have this security nihilism that I think infects the people that are in the industry too. If there's no way to secure it and there's no companies that are secure, then why even care about it? Why should I keep reading the news when all the news is bad?
Yeah.
In a political year, this feels very appropriate and very appropriate.
True. Yeah. And I've had that feeling myself. Microsoft getting called before Congress about this terrible breach that affected the federal government. And Dell had a massive breach where the attacker himself notified them that he'd been able to execute this attack. And I remember back when Capital One had a breach because of a little tiny loophole in AWS. And it's sort of like, if those guys are getting breached, then what hope is there for anybody? These are big security vendors in their own right. So
yeah, they're arguably the most well-funded companies in the world, and they're failing. And so how is my startup going to do it? How is my 45-person accounting company going to stay secure? And really, we're just doing our best. And that's where I think tools can help. The tools are very expensive. They are often cheaper than a breach, particularly when you consider your reputational value. You kind of have to measure it. That is changing all that time. That target is moving, because if the security nihilism gets too high, then people just stop caring and it won't affect your reputation. Like, it didn't affect CrowdStrike for longer than I think 3 days or something before their stock recovered. It was a ridiculously short amount of time. So tools are going to help us secure it. And I know that you have to do your best. And like we talked about earlier in the show, if you're building secure layers in your security sandwich at your company, then you'll probably win every time.
So do you think AI might help us get to a more proactive than reactive state?
Yes, it's always this sort of race condition. But yes, I think the tooling is helping us. The tooling is often also helping the bad guys. And the supply chains for any of our software are just tremendously broad. It's wild how many things we use. Some of the tools at my day job that we're evaluating, we use thousands of libraries. And how do you secure your product when you have 1,000 dependencies that you also need to secure?
Right.
And how many dependencies do those dependencies have themselves? The problem is massive in scope. And that's where automation and AI can really shine. And neither one is going to be smarter than your senior engineer. But they can take in data and process it at a massive scale. There is no one that can read faster than an AI. It can process 1 million lines in a couple of seconds of your logs and see oh, those 3 look weird. I better send those to a person. And that's the real value here. I don't know any company ever that I've ever worked with, and I've worked with dozens, that says, oh, we have enough security people to read all the logs and process all the alerts, because it's tens of thousands a day at even smaller companies because there's just so many. So if you have a layer of AI and automation that are processing those logs first, and say a human has to evaluate 50 or 20 or 10 a day, that's reasonable. They can spend their time making good choices that AIs can't. So I think it's a huge boon for this. We do still see AI and automation used by the black hats to fuzz systems and find problems and write exploits. And some of the AIs that don't have bumpers can actually execute exploits, which is very scary. But it helps blue teams quite a bit more because of those logs and alertings and systems. It can process all of your stuff very, very rapidly and surface the things that need a harder look. And that's huge.
And on the optimistic side, I've been starting to poke into security from that DevSecOps. And I remember at that time, the conversation around cybersecurity was a lot like the conversation about disaster recovery used to be, where it was perceived sort of as insurance. Nice to have. Nobody wants their name to end up in the headlines in a bad way, but it won't happen to us. That seems to be changing. The level of awareness does seem to be changing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I see a lot of companies establishing platform teams that are trying to inject DevSecOps into their processes. There's a lot of companies that don't even like this idea of DevOps at all, that we should just be training our developers and have a platform team that builds tools for the developers that do automations, that deploy the code and test the code and do all the things. It's hard because the scope is so massive of all the things we ask folks to do. You should be great at writing an application and also understanding kernel security and also deploying and securing S3 buckets. And that those things are so disparate and broad and different. And it might take years to learn one really well. So how many people in the world know all 3 really well? So I think it makes sense. We'll continue to have DevOps. We'll continue to have platform teams. And I love that they are automating that labor away from the developers that are writing our products. Developers shouldn't have to know infrastructure security. They can. If you do, you're going to be more valuable and get a higher paycheck. But most folks don't. Most folks are good at .NET. They're good at C#. They're not good at Terraform and cloud security. So my version of DevSecOps that I have seen propagating is writing tools and automations that do the security stuff that the developers should be doing or could be doing. Lint your code automatically. Make sure all your commits are right and your branch versioning is working correctly. That could be a person or that could be an automation. So as you build better tools for your developers, they'll have to do less work and they can focus on writing a better product. And that's what makes you money. So help those folks out.
Any final thoughts? Anything I haven't thought to bring up that you want to mention?
For folks that are listening at home, and if this seems just totally Greek to you, or if you're in Greece, totally Italian to you, you can just go do it. The world is different than it was 10 or 15 years ago. The cloud and most security tools you can get access to for free or for very little cost. And a lot of people, me included, put stuff on the internet for free that you can go learn. We've all landed on those Stack Overflow pages that say the person who is doing this is an idiot. You should never have done this for a question you're trying to get answered. Not everyone is like that. There are many very solid cultures. So you will find support if you look for it hard enough. Keep going.
Just keep swimming.
Just keep swimming.
Great. Well, again, Kyler, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Always great to talk to you. And
you too.
Thanks for being with us.
For sure. Thank you for having me.
This has been IT Ops Query Season 2, The State of SecOps. If you have any feedback on this episode or want to share questions, comments, or stories we should consider covering, please reach out to me at B as in boy, P as in Peter, A-R-I, S as in Samuel, E-A-U at TechTarget.com. Please consider rating, reviewing, and subscribing to this podcast on your platform of choice. And tune in next week for our continued conversations with industry experts about the challenges facing security operations. Thank you for being with us so far.